there can be all sorts of bad habits in an organization. They tend to be areas where folks are not engaged or inspecting them to a specific level. I think an easy one that many organizations have is the handoff between marketing into sales, whether it's SDR to sales or otherwise, right? Generally, comp plans will gauge SDRs, ADRs, MDRs, BDRs, whatever I call them, development reps, on the amount of pipeline they generate. And then they hold sales accountable for the conversion of that pipeline. And sales reps never want to put things in the pipeline because once it's in pipeline, it'll get inspected. They want to know what's going on. If it doesn't close, why didn't it close? Is it the sales rep's fault? And the SDR is always incented to push for it to be closed because that's how they get paid. A bad habit is to not ever look at that number, right? I think in a previous life, that number of conversion ended up being like 99% because the sales rep was just accepting anything and converting it. So to correct for that, we're opting to understand. And I think what ops is special about, something special about ops is that ops is in the middle of all of it. What ended up happening is our win rates plummeted because there's all this garbage pipeline in our pipeline, which maybe that's just the status quo that we want to set. Maybe we are okay with saying that pipeline is anytime we have a good conversation, regardless if there's any minimum criteria or qualification. If left to go unnoticed for too long, you realize you are setting budgets around how marketing spends off of a faulty number that doesn't lead to conversions. And it can end up costing the company a lot because you're investing dollars, resources, whether it be headcount or programs, in the wrong places.
What I like about this example is it touches on, I think, one of the big problems here, which is even if you have a qualification process, a set of criteria that is clearly outlined, there's always going to be some amount of judgment in that.
Yes.
And there are also kind of personal things that get in the way, where you have your development reps passing over leads. They probably work with the same salespeople over and over. They develop personal relationships, and then there becomes more of a challenge, like a social emotional challenge of like, hey, am I going to reject this? People feel bad rejecting the things that are brought to them by the SDRs. And that, I think, you can either have good or bad habits around that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think those relationships, I mean, even take it into like a colloquial definition of a habit. How do you manage your daughter? You don't give in to every request that she has, right? Just like a sales rep should never give in to every single thing that an SDR gives them. You coach them. You give them guidelines. You tell them like, hey, here's how I could have liked this better. Same parenting skills, a lot of the same thing, along the same things that you would read in like parenting handbooks also apply to management. And it's not just your directs that you're managing, but also your ecosystem, the people that you work with as well.
Yeah, I'm thankful that most of the sales reps I work with are more reasonable than my 4-year-old. But yes, I agree. And I think this points out a number of other kind of bad habits as I start to think about, things that you could potentially avoid. A lot of them do have to do with either wanting to save time or the trade-off between, rigor and speed, or the way that we interact with other people and what feels good versus what might be good. So an example of one of these rigor versus speed ones that I've heard, a lot of times, RevOps teams will try to codify into process things that are very difficult to really enforce. So as an example, hey, we want to have the appropriate contacts for a given opportunity attached to that opportunity object. Well, you don't necessarily know. Every deal is going to have a different number that's appropriate. And so you can't say it's got to be at least 3 in order to move to the next opportunity stage. You could say there needs to be at least 1 because there always will be 1. But, that process is going to fall short where the habit is reps put on the appropriate number, right? That's what I think, as I'm starting to understand this and get a clear picture, that to me feels like a habit as opposed to the process itself, which can never get you all the way there.
So there's the other aspect of it too, right? You can put guidelines in Salesforce or validation rules or gates to be able to move things forward in sales stages, but you also want to make sure that it is engaged upon and inspected as well, right? The last thing you want is the sales rep to just add the same contact and be like, oh, this contact holds all three roles. They're the EB and the champion and the main technical person I'm talking to, right? You also don't want a rep to game the system. So there still needs to be some kind of human habit there to remind leadership to inspect it, ops, whatever that may be, of flagging when things are outside the norm. And I think that's where technology could actually be tremendously helpful, of flagging things outside the norm instead of forcing reps to do something that may be unnatural.
You're touching on something that I think is very interesting. I see you as an optimist in that there are a lot of folks in RevOps who believe, and who have the scars to back it up, that reps will only do the things that are codified into the business systems. If you want a sales rep to put data into Salesforce, then you need to make sure that that is a required thing in Salesforce, or it's required in order to compensate them. But it sounds like a little bit of what you're saying is it is possible to build a culture where people have good habits and where they do a little more than the bare minimum of what is like hard coded into the system.
I think it's hard to incent sales reps to do the right thing in large organizations because they don't get the what's in it for me. It's a little easier to incent sales reps to do the right thing at smaller organizations where there might be a direct relationship between a rep and a product manager, right? And the product managers are hopping onto POC calls with them. And so that relationship, I think, matters a lot. And this is also where I've seen larger organizations improve by creating steering committees of top reps, giving them exposure, right? It's also a development opportunity for them to get exposure on decision-making processes, why they exist, why they matter, and to be able to visibly see the outcomes of why I'm asking to go put 3 people into every opportunity.